I wear two hats. RCS, which is a private extension service in Australia, and CarbonLink, which is our basically has been a research organisation in soil carbon for quite a lot of years. I believe that globally and for the last 10,000 years, agriculture has actually floundered because consumers have never paid the true cost of producing food. The environment has paid the true cost of producing food. And what I want to talk a little bit about is that one way in which we can get consumers to pay an additional amount, which will help farmers start to make the changes they need to make, is through environmental credits, carbon and environmental credits. And so that's where I want to speak today. Firstly, I see that there's, if we look at profitability, and it's absolutely essential that farmers make a profit. You can't be green and in the red. The profit's a function of gross margin, which is itself a function of productivity. Productivity is a function of plant available water and nutrients. Plant available water and nutrients is a function of cation exchange capacity. Cation exchange capacity is a function of soil organic carbon and particularly humus. Soil organic carbon is a function of biological activity. And biological activity is a function of food, shelter, water and air. Food, shelter, water and air are a function of plant productivity. And so you'll see that what we've got here is a cycle. And every little bit of that cycle needs to be working effectively if we're going to make real changes to our environmental systems. In fact, it's not just a cycle, but it's a spiral. And in agriculture, we've got a choice of spiralling our ecosystems up or spiralling them down. And it doesn't matter whether we're in a cropping industry or the grazing industry, we're either going to be spiralling up or spiralling down based on that cycle, which I just put up there. And in fact, in that, there's some data there. The property on the left is, has a carrying capacity of 40 stock days per hectare per 100 mils of rain. The one on the right-hand side is less than 20 stock days per hectare per 100 mils of rain. And the only difference is 4 years' worth of grazing management. No other inputs. And so it's a choice that we actually have and can make as to which direction we're going in. And I'm not going to run through the soil health principles, but I will start with the first one. And the first one, I believe, is plan, monitor and manage. We can't create soil health, we can't lower our emissions, we can't improve our efficiencies unless we're planning, monitoring and managing what we do. And in all the principles that we put together, plan, monitor and manage is our number one principle, because unless we've got the hearts and the minds of farmers involved, we're not actually going anywhere. And our first rule for planning is do no harm. And what I mean is do no harm to soil biology. And what we really want to do is look at how do we work with soil biology instead of against it. And there's a lot of stuff we do in agriculture today that works against soil biology. And there are effective alternatives to using some of the things that affect biology. You know, our salt-based fertilisers, for example, that do significant damage to mycorrhizal fungi. And I'll talk a bit more about the importance of mycorrhizal fungi in soil carbon sequestration. But there's a whole lot of things that we do on one hand, and we can still get the same outcomes by doing something slightly different. I believe the biggest impact that we're going to have on soil carbon is due to management. And that's why it's the hearts and minds of farmers that are absolutely critical in this process. Because every change we can make, every reason for making it comes back to management. What we need to manage is biology. our systems are run on biology, not chemistry, not physics. Biology controls and changes the chemistry and the physics of our soils. And therefore, the paradigm shift that we've got to make in agriculture is to start managing for and around biology. We still need and will need fertilisers and other inputs into agriculture. But let's use them as catalysts to stimulate and develop our biology. And I've got this at the top of the pile, but in fact it's very, very significant, and that's biodiversity. And we need to get biodiversity into our soil populations, into our plant populations, into our livestock populations, and into virtually everything that we do. As farmers and graziers, there's a lot of tools that we have to make some of those changes. In grazing industries, there's a number of grazing systems that we can use. There are grazing systems that will heal ecosystems, and there are grazing systems that drive ecosystems into non-existence. And if we pick the ones that heal, we will be able to sequester carbon in our soils. We can do multi-species cover cropping or ordinary cover cropping, green manuring, crop rotations, continuous cropping, aeration. If we go back to what biology needs, soil, food, water and air. We've got to get air and we've got to get water into our soils so our biology can do the jobs that Mother Nature intended it to do. And hydration. We can get biology into soils very cheaply through compost extracts from humic composts. Still need our fertilisers, and we need biodiversity, and we need to think about that in everything that we do. And so one of the big contentious issues, and probably one of the biggest unknowns when it comes to soil carbon sequestration, is what's the sequestration rate going to be? And there's a little bit of data here. We've done some major literature reviews. In regenerative grazing, the average change in soil organic carbon is about 1 tonne per hectare per annum. That's organic carbon, not CO2, versus minus 0.07 tonnes under non-regenerative practices, but up to 3.8 tonnes a year being reported. Under cropping systems, about 1.46 tonnes of carbon sequestered per annum in regenerative practices versus a negative under conventional ways of farming. So there are 4 key drivers in terms of the hearts and the minds of farmers in driving us to get soil carbon sequestration. And the first and the biggest one is sequestration rate. You hear a lot of talk about measurement, but sequestration rate outweighs that by orders of magnitude in terms of profitability for farmers. And you'll see there, I've just compared 1 tonne versus 1.5 tonne versus 2 tonnes of carbon sequestered, run that completely through all the equations in the current methodology and worked out the cash flow over 25 years. And you'll see that the difference between 1 tonne and 2 tonnes goes from $1.6 million of net cash flow to $3.5 million. And that's on a 2,000 hectare property. And I've used $34 a tonne carbon for carbon price there. And that's based on some of the predictions that we're currently seeing and what companies in Australia and overseas are currently budgeting by 2030 for carbon prices. The internal rates of return on carbon projects, you'll see there, is 39% up to 60%. Now, any investor is going to be pretty excited with a 39% internal rate of return. And so that's the sort of thing that we can see, and that is based on an annual cost per hectare of $6 per hectare per annum to run the project. That is about twice what we think it'll be within 12 months. The Minister has a target to get it back to $3, and we're on track to get it back to that. The second thing, obviously, that's going to affect profitability for farmers is going to be the price of carbon. And the cost of measurement is actually a very small component in carbon projects. By far and away, the biggest component is the cost of practice change. To put that in context, it might cost you $20 to measure carbon, so about $5 a year rather, compared to an investment of $100 to $400 a hectare to actually make practice change. Scale of project is also a big driver. As we get bigger projects, I thought I had some data there, but I've gone past it. So scale of project, and as obviously the bigger the project, the lower the overheads per project and the more profitable it actually becomes. Everyone's very familiar with many of the benefits from soil carbon, but there's a couple I want to point out, and that's around enterprise hedge and risk management within agriculture. If we've got carbon credits stored in our bank account, if you like, or our credit account, then when we get our droughts and low commodity prices, etc., we can start to pull those things out and manage some of the fluctuations that we're really seeing driving through the climate at the moment. So I won't go into this in too much detail, but basically you'll see the internal rates of return as you go up in scale improve significantly, even at the same sequestration rates. Initial investment, you can see there, that's over a 5-year period. Again, we can make, and farmers can make, some pretty good money out of this. The science to do this is improving rapidly, and I'll show you some data. This is a project that we sampled in 2016. At that time, our variance, we were able to measure that carbon plus or minus 12.5 tonnes of carbon per hectare. Now, if that's as good as we could do, that guy's going to have no tradable carbon to sell. We went back and did it recently with new science and new approaches to measurement, and particularly new approaches to stratification, and our standard deviation is back at 1 tonne. So we know that at 1 tonne variance, we can, and even 5 tonnes of carbon sequestration over 5 years, farmers, that is measurable and economic. Just went through that, so I'll skip past that one. When it comes to soil sampling, we use heavy gear to do things quickly and effectively. Soil samples are pulled out, they're stored in plastic, and they're put straight into a cool room to stop the bugs continuing to work on the carbon in the cores. This is the only one of these machines that's commercially available in the world, and it's based on CSIRO technology, and it non-destructively measures carbon, moisture, and bulk density all the way down a core, and this technology has allowed us to significantly increase the accuracy of what we're doing as well. It takes photographs of the core as well as to the NIR, and there's a lot more information we'll be pulling off that in the near future. I just want to show you this project, which was, we measured in 2016, but did it again 3 years later as an R&D project. This particular property had had 2 years of drought in those 3 years, and it was so bad he was destocked for 18 months of those 3 years. He actually sequestered carbon. If you look at the average soil organic carbon change, his carbon percent went up right through the drought. In other words, he didn't lose it. He didn't lose what he put in the good year. But the interesting thing is that we got a variation in the gravel content of those cores as we did them the second time. And what we found was the variation in gravel took away most of the carbon that had actually been sequestered when you put it through the equations. So we got some issues there. But I want to point to the numbers at the bottom right-hand corner of that table. He had a creditable amount of carbon of 3,500 tonnes of CO2, but under our methodology, he only gets to sell 1,150 tonnes. We have got to get some significant change in the policy and the way that that stuff's operating in Australia. And as most of you will be aware, the magic pudding that makes this work, and I've been talking tonnes of soil carbon, the thing that makes it work is that we're selling CO2, and we've got that multiplier that helps us make that work. And so it's operating obviously within the carbon cycle, and the more we get carbon cycling within our system, then the more we're going to be able to keep behind and the more we're going to be able to sequester. So it's a relatively simple equation. It's photosynthesis minus oxidation equals sequestration. The property on the left is continuously grazed. The property on the right has been cell grazed for about 11 years. And when you look into them, they're quite different. And when you look at the soils, they're also quite different. The sequestration rate on the right-hand side is 3 tonnes per hectare per annum compared to the property on the left, and that was measured over a 6 or 7 year period. And there's a little bit of data here from Gabe Brown in the US, who's now taken his soil carbon levels from 1% up to around 7%. And I was talking to him just before Christmas, and he's just had his soils measured down to 1.5 metres and has 460 tonnes of carbon now to 1.5 metres, and it is 7% organic carbon all the way. So in other words, he's now built, I don't know, that's as far as they measured, so he's built probably significantly more than that. We can put carbon, significant amount of carbon, into soil very, very quickly. This is a property at Dubbo, where they grow sweet corn and then graze animals for 6 months in between the corn crops. They've gone from 0.7% organic carbon there to 3.7% in 2.5 years. That's equivalent to a sequestration rate of around about 9 tonnes of carbon per hectare per year. That's carbon, not CO2. So we can do some fairly significant sequestration rates. Where are those significant rates coming from? They're not coming from biomass, as the old models tell us. They're coming from biology. And the correlation between mycorrhizal fungi populations, the fungi bacteria ratio to new carbon sequestered in a soil is, in this particular experiment, was 0.99. So you can see that it's biology that's driving this very clearly. And when we get the biology right, the biology is driving photosynthetic capacity. In our conventional agricultural and grazing systems today, our plants are operating at around about 10 to 15% of theoretical photosynthetic capacity. It's possible under irrigation to increase that at least 5-fold. And one of the reasons that happens is that, again, as we get the biology going, the biology changes the chemistry. And as we change the chemistry, we change productivity. And so my final slide is to explain how some of that happens and what we've got to get to. We've got to start with biological biodiversity. In other words, the biodiversity of our soil biology. We've got to increase the population of that biodiversity. As we increase that population of a biodiverse system, we get to quorum sensing. Once we create quorum sensing, we rapidly increase soil organic carbon, humus, and cation exchange capacity. As we increase those, the plant now starts to get fed by the biology instead of it trying to pick up nutrients out of soil water. When the plant gets fed right, we increase photosynthetic capacity and Brix level, and then we get increased production. Our challenge, I think, is for us to work out in dryland systems, how do we double photosynthetic capacity? because we know, and it's been done at scale in the dairy industry, to get a 5-fold increase in dry matter yield but under irrigation.